Hello everybody, we're ready to work on lesson 42, homework help. But before we do, I'm going to read you a little bit of scripture. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. Now this is a different version than the one we're usually memorizing, but it sounds real familiar, doesn't it? But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. So with that thought, we should be meditating on the word of the Lord all the time, day and night, not just in our spare moments. And I acknowledge that I don't always do that, but it's something that we should strive for, to be just really connecting with the Lord 24/7. So let's look at more of his wonderful creation here in exponential functions homework help. So the first one that I'm going to do for you is number 9 on lesson 42, which was one of your homework problems. And it is y is equal to 1/2 x to the negative x, 1/2 raised to the x minus 2. Let me turn that just a little bit so you can see it a little better. Okay, so now let's think about this a minute. The base is 1/2, okay? And normally if I had a 1/2 to the x, how would I expect it to look? Would I expect it to look like this one? Or would I expect a 1/2 base to look like this one? All right? I'm going with this one. This one would be like a 2 to the x. This one is the 1/2 to the x. Or remember, if it was just a 1/2 to the x, I could write that as a 2 to the negative x. So you need to get real familiar with these exponential functions. So I'm going to expect this one to be declining because it's a 1/2 to the positive x power. Okay, but then what do you think this negative 2 is going to do to my function? Is it going to cross at 0, 1, or is it going to be translated? And if it's going to be translated, which direction would we expect it to be translated to? Well, if I had an x minus 2 quantity squared and I said, graph that parabola, what would you think you were going to do? Would you slide it 2 steps to the right? Well, that's what's happening here because this x minus 2 is in the function, all right? The exponent is the function here. It's inside the function. Therefore, I'm going to be expecting to slide this function 2 steps to the right. Let's see if that's what happens. Let's put in our little x and y grid, okay, and start graphing. When I plug in a 0, this is not a 0. When I plug in a 0, this is a minus 2. So a 1/2 to the minus 2 is going to flip that thing over and it's going to become a 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now when I plug in a 1, this becomes a negative 1. And a 1/2 to the negative 1 is going to be a 2. So when I come over here to the 1, I go up to a 2. All right, then I plug in a 2 and this becomes a 0. So when this becomes a 0, the whole thing becomes a 1 and 2 goes up to 1. Okay, I'm declining like I expected a 1/2 to the x to do, but it's not got a 0, 1. It's got a 2, 1. So it is shifting 2 steps over to the right. When I plug in a 3, this becomes a 1/2 to the 1, which is going to be a 1/2, and it's going to start its real dive there. And this would be my function. Okay? Now let's look over to another homework problem here. And this one is number 11 on lesson 42. And it says, suppose we have a function f of x is cosecant of x, and we have a function g of x is cotangent of x. Find the function, the f, at negative pi over 6 minus the g at negative 13 pi over 6. So this is a substitution in where we're talking about this being our function and we're sliding this negative pi over 6 in place of the x. All right, so this one right here is going to be cosecant of negative pi over 6 minus, instead of the g, we'll put the g function, which is cotangent of x, but instead of the x, I'll put negative 13 pi over 6. Halfway there. So now I'm going to look at this one, and I'm going to say, okay, where is negative pi over 6? Remember, negative angles go this way. The pi over 6 is a 30, so I'm just talking about a 30 down. And the cosecant is 1 over the sine. 1 over the sine of a negative 30. Okay, there's my 30 degrees. My sine is going to be a short one, isn't it? So it's going to be 1 over 1/2, and will that be a positive or a negative 1/2 there? It's going to be a negative 1/2, isn't it? So when I evaluate that, it's going to flip up and become a negative 2. Everybody seeing that down there? Okay, so then I'm going to look over here at the other part here, and when I go 13 pi over 6, remember 12 pi over 6 is one whole trip around. So that's going to be, when I take away the 12 pi over 6, it's just going to be 1 pi over 6, but it's negative. So 1 pi over 6 is going to be right there again, isn't it? 30 degrees down. But now I'm taking the cotangent, and the cotangent is going to be the cosine over the sine. So I'm going to have a cosine of a negative 30 over the sine of a negative 30. Okay, and that's going to become the cosine of a negative 30 is, cosine of the negative 30 is going to be the big one, isn't it? So it's going to be the square root of 3 over 2, but this angle, the cosine of negative 30, is to the right, so it's going to be positive. And then on the bottom, the sine, though, is going to be negative, and the sine of 30 is 1/2. So when I multiply by 2 over 2 over there, this one's going to become a negative square root of 3. Negative square root of 3. Okay, now, see if we can get this all together here. Okay, so now that I've got a negative 2 minus a negative square root of 3. Negative 2 minus a negative square root of 3 is going to be a negative 2 plus a square root of 3. And that is our answer at the bottom. And we are correct. Okay, so that's how you're going to work those type of problems. And you're all ready to do your 42 homework.